There it is. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Stratosphere Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Whittle. And here we are on a Thursday night, the 21st of March, the summer solstice. Sorry. There it is. Just Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Who's that idiot? Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Whittle. Leapt to a conclusion. It's actually the summer. It's the vernal equinox today. So interesting day. Sometimes called the first point of Aries. It is the day when the sun is crossing the equator, the celestial equator. Half the time the Earth's equator is like this, and the path of the Earth is tilted at 26 degrees, so the sun appears to do this. And when it crosses the equator, that's an equinox, and then there's the summer solstice, and then there's the autumnal equinox, then the winter solstice, and back again. So it's a big day, and since this is the vernal equinox, that means equinox means equal nights. The day and the night should be more or less the same length. And now the sun's going to climb a little bit higher into the sky every day in the northern hemisphere until the summer solstice, which is June 21st. It's reversed down below the equator because that means the sun's getting lower. Speaking of which, we saw somebody check in just before we started from New Zealand. Hello, New Zealand, and all the ships at sea. Especially interested in your presence tonight. Always glad to have people overseas here. But in this particular case, I'm especially interested because this firewall that I finished all of 6 minutes ago has to do with that event down there, and I'm very curious to get your take on it. I've never done this before, premiered a firewall on the Stratosphere Lounge, probably because I've never had the opportunity to do it before. Let me just fix this a little bit. There we go. And I guess what I mean by that is, they've never really been ready. This time I just had the thing ready, just as we're getting ready to roll, so I figured why not. So anyway, that's about that. We'll get to that in just a minute. There he is. I'm sorry, Daiui? Anyway, it's going to be interesting to see the comments of people. I never really get to see. I don't imagine people are going to be typing into the comment section while it's playing. Maybe they will be. I'd love it if they did, but it'll be great to get people's immediate reaction to it. It's a longer one. It's felt more like a eject essay. So we'll see. We'll get to that in just a minute or two, I guess. Scotty Ott was out here, as you know, from our right angles. He was here for a couple days. We went to Disneyland, and we had ourselves a final time. Stephanie, his beautiful wife, and Scott, and my wife Natasha, and me, and the mouse. And it was absolutely great. Probably the best fireworks I've ever seen. So it's impossible to imagine an America where Scott Ott has not been to Disneyland, on the account of the fact that he really seems like, if there's ever, I mean this with the greatest disrespect, I cannot imagine a better greeter at Disneyland than Scott Ott. I mean, really, he's just the perfect guy for it. So anyway, we had a lot of fun. So that's basically it. And already seen in the comments the kind of thing I knew we'd see. And it's kind of what this firewall is about. Essentially, it's hey, why should we feel sorry for the Muslims in New Zealand after everything that happened? After all the times that people screamed Allahu Akbar and went into nightclubs, and the answer for that is very simple. It's because the Muslims in New Zealand are innocent people. They didn't do anything, and they don't deserve to be murdered. Nobody deserves to be murdered. And what we're promoting here is common sense and decency is decency. I don't wish for my political opponents to be killed, and I certainly don't wish for innocent people to be gunned down under any circumstances whatsoever. So that's kind of it's a relative. I mean, having watched this this massacre, I really did get to see things in a new way. Not so much a new way, it woke me up to some things. So I guess probably the best thing to do at this point is to just go ahead and play the thing. It's about 10 after 6, 8 after 6, started real early today, which means on time, because we are going to head out to Apollo 11 tonight, Natasha and I, and we have to go over the hill. So we're going to have to wrap this thing up around 7:15, 7:30, something like that. But I did want to get to questions and so on. So anyway, here we go. I think we're more or less ready. So I should say that while I speed checked this thing, I mean, I just did spot check on it. I have not ever, I've not seen this thing all the way through yet, so it's possible that there's an error in there. And if there is, I'll fix it before I put it online. But anyway, especially now, thanks again. I'm looking forward to seeing the reaction. And it's about an 8.5 minute, 9 minute after firewall. So let's tee that thing up, and you can tell me what you think. When I first heard that the mass murderer in New Zealand had recorded the event with a GoPro camera and live streamed it to Facebook, I determined that I was going to find that video and watch it. Now, for those of you that have a moral problem with this, I'm sorry, but for me, something more important takes precedence over any issues of decorum. I have a need to know, you see. I'm responsible for defending myself, my family, and whatever innocent people I can in the extremely unlikely event that this should ever happen to me. And if I'm going to be prepared for that mentally, I need to know what it looks like so I can think about it now, think about what I would do and how I would do it. So before we get to the lessons, let me just tell you what I saw. The shooter walked into an unremarkable little building. It didn't look like a mosque, it looked more like a rec center. His weapon and the other weapons he had in his car were covered in slogans spelled out in big white letters. I couldn't make out the words, but they looked like they'd been painted on with liquid paper. There were a few people speaking in the doorway. The shooter raised his rifle and mechanically pulled the trigger, and it was just pop, 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 pop. 2 or 3 people went down right away. A wounded man tried to crawl away down the hall. Pop, 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 and he stopped moving. As he went down the hallway, he took snapshots here and there before entering a large hall. Turning to his left against one wall, I saw a large group of people huddled in the corner, following some ancient instinct to get under some cover. I'm sure that's what I would have done. There was another group on the right wall as well. The shooter turned back to the left and started firing into the mass of humanity. I don't remember hearing any screaming or crying, certainly no ranting on the part of the murderer, just the rapid, methodical pop, 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 pop. A young man made a break for it. He appeared to have bumped the shooter, and I hoped he might have made it past him, but there were some more pops and he went down at point-blank range. Returning to the crowd on the left, the shooter stood in the doorway and just began firing into that mass of humanity, just pop, 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 which didn't seem to have any visible effect other than to cause people to stop moving. Then he turned to the right and did the same thing to the other group of terrified people. No screaming, no yelling, not a word from the shooter that I can remember anyway. Then he methodically shot every single person in the room, several times each, just calmly executing the wounded. He shot an old man with a snow-white beard in the head. The force of that bullet blew his fez against the wall, and that was one of only 2 times I can remember where the full impact of the violence of a bullet hitting somebody was clear and visible. After he shot up the right side, he turned around and headed back out the hall to the entrance. As he stepped outside, a pool of blood was starting to spread under one of the first people he'd murdered on the way in. The shooter came out to the street, looked left, and then turned right. He walked a few steps down the sidewalk so that he could see down an alley with the mosque on one side and parked cars on the other. I saw 2 figures seemingly a long, long way away, but that was probably due to the wide-angle lens. He fired multiple times, and they both dropped. He then calmly walked back into the mosque, and then as calmly and methodically went back to the shooting into the mass of dead or dying people. Then he walked back to his car. When he got to the sidewalk, I saw 2 people running out from the corner of the property. He fired on them, and they both went down. One of the people he just shot was a woman with long black hair. She was lying on her side in the street with her hands raised for help. He shot her in the head, and that was only the second time that the actual force of those bullets could be seen. Then he shot her again in the back. Then he walked to his car, opened the trunk where there appeared to be a shotgun and perhaps another rifle, all covered with this strange white lettering. He got in his car, drove away, and opened fire on some people from the car. Now, I know for a certain fact that I saw him spare a few others, but I couldn't exactly see why he shot some people and not others. I could guess, though. So, why did I just walk you through that nightmare? Well, because there were several things that surprised me as an eyewitness to this massacre, and the one surprise by far was how silent, calm, and methodical this murderer was as he removed priceless individual lives from this world. You know, I've read a lot of history, especially a lot of military history. I've read countless stories of trench combat, jungle ambushes, the thoughts and feelings of men being cut to pieces as they stepped onto beaches, and the thoughts and feelings of men who were doing the cutting to pieces. They're all tales of fury or rage, bloodlust, madness, stories of sorrow, regret, sympathy, courage, self-sacrifice, mercy, and sometimes even kindness. There are many reports of men under so much stress that they literally saw red. The landscape turned blood red by the intense blood pressure inside of their own eyes. All of these accounts were filled with emotion, packed with emotion, because that is what sane people feel when they're placed into situations like that. This shooter never rushed, never hesitated, and he walked with the same almost absent-minded calm, the kind of movements that you and I might make if we searched our own house trying to remember where we left our car keys. When we talk about these people being insane, we imagine them spitting and cursing as they go about their mission of murder. In our minds, we want to put rage into them because blind, raging hatred is the only emotion that we can conjure in our sanity to get close enough for a motive. That maniacal rampage is what we imagine because we're human beings trying to understand something inhuman. Real insanity is far more repulsive than that. Witnessing real insanity is to watch a creature calmly and coolly doing what we human beings cannot do. The utter lack of screams and wailing and blood, the absence of any outward signs of madness that takes you to a place where you begin to realize that this is not about Christians versus Muslims, whites versus blacks, Nazis versus Jews, loners versus the popular kids, or liberal values versus conservative values. There's only one distinction, one line in all of these shootings and mass murders, and that is the line between human beings and upright bipeds that look like human beings, between the repulsive but human cliff of passionate hatred and the abyss of feeling no feeling whatsoever. That's what I took away from this, and what I suspect happens in virtually all of these mass shootings. It's actually very simple. It's us versus them every time. Us versus them, living human people of uncounted political views and religious beliefs, in other words, the innocent, against creatures that look like us, talk like us, walk like us, but which are as far short of humanity as a rock is from a rose. Watching this person at work, and that's what it is for them, it's simply a job to do, you begin to realize that the inanimate object that we need to fear is not a gun, it's not a bomb, it's not a truck plowing through a crowd or an airliner flown into a building. The inanimate object that we need to find and destroy is the detached, shark-eyed, unsmiling, ungrimacing mask of predators which we will not nor cannot understand, and which has been with us since Cain used his semi-automatic rock against the skull of Abel. They are the weapon, and that's what we need to be looking for. And it turns out, in retrospect, they were pretty easy to spot, every one of them pretty much. The only way to prevent these horrors in the future is for us to be looking for the right thing in the right places. Huns marking their conquests with pyramids of 10,000 skulls, Aztecs blandly cutting the beating hearts out of 80,000 human beings in 4 days, SS officers gently steadying small children on the edge of the ravine before shooting them in the back of the head. There's no religion, no ideology that can make an actual human being do these things. The creatures that can do these things use politics and religion as a fig leaf to cover the fact that there's nothing underneath the fig leaf. Nothing. There is no person there. This massacre and all of the others we've seen were not the fault of Donald Trump or Louis Farrakhan or David Duke or Barack Obama or anyone else. It didn't happen because of 4chan, GoPro, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and whatever other messages might have been spread. And to suggest that a human being might be capable of this cold-blooded execution of innocent people because of something a Swedish man might have said while playing a video game is just plain infantile, it's incorrect, and it's cruel. accusing anyone of complicity in this. In other words, assuming that somebody else was able to make that kind of influence on somebody. Well, that's to say that there is no fundamental humanity and no free will, that this insurmountable chasm between human and non-human can be bridged with a stray tweet or a Facebook post. We believe these things because when we see these horrors, we get angry. And we get angry because we're human beings, all of us, who can put ourselves into that room with those other human beings as these alien bipeds work their way down their carefully prepared checklists. We want to believe it's somebody's fault because we are not willing to face the alternative, which is much more terrifying. And that's the simple truth that there are right now, walking among us, creatures with human faces who possess all of our skills and all of our intellect and all of our ability to make meticulous plans. But these individuals do not feel pain or grief or remorse or even elation and satisfaction. They lack the smallest shred of humanity, and that, by definition, makes them inhuman creatures who don't act on behalf of any human agency and whose only company on this earth are each other. And that is that. Yeah, that's the thing that struck me just the hardest is the lack of passion. That's the thing that was so alien. I remember having, I remember kind of the moment that I had that thought where, that we want to, if we had seen this in a movie, if they'd made a movie about this, anybody, I'm not just talking about left-wingers or right-wingers, certainly if I was writing a movie about it, what I would do is I would have the people screaming and crying and begging for mercy, and if Hollywood did it, you'd see the bullet hits and the blood splatter, and you'd see the blasts of brains against the wall, and then you just hear the masses of people screaming in terror. You'd hear the gun wouldn't go pop; it would just sound like a real gun, and then you would see the shooter with this look of rage or this look of victory or something, triumph on his face, and you'd see the wide eyes and you'd see the breath and you'd just see all of it. And watching this video, I realized, no, that's not what happens. It's the absolute utter lack of drama that is that's so alien and shocking, and not just on the part of the shooter, on the part of the people as well. It didn't seem appropriate to me to turn this into a how to survive a mass shooting incident, because I don't think that's the point. I think the point is anybody who tries to say that this is because of something that PewDiePie wrote, it's insane and it's disgusting and it's wrong and it doesn't help us. It doesn't help us with this. What's important is the sense that these people, they're the weapons, and that they'll use guns when they can get guns, they'll use trucks when they can get trucks, they'll use airplanes, they'll use bombs, they'll use rocks, they'll use anything. It doesn't matter. Actual human beings cannot shoot innocent people in the head. And that's exactly right. And as the original piece Snowflake says, it also gives the true killer a pass. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. It gives the killer a pass. These 9/11 conspiracies, among all of the other repulsive things they do, basically take the 19 people that murdered all those folks off the hook. This is, we're going to keep getting these things as long as we keep looking in the wrong places, worried about the guns or the bombs or even the religions or the ideologies. When these people come to life for that, 10-minute, 20-minute, 2-hour period when they're actually think that they're alive, you realize that this is just not something we can do, that we're capable of doing. And not only aren't we capable, but we shouldn't be capable. Anybody who can fire into a group of civilians, and then just simply put 3 or 4 rounds into every one of them to make sure that every one of these people that he's never met before are dead, that's not a human being. And this whole thing about blaming this side or blaming that side has got to stop. This is not. I think the point is my favorite line in the thing is to say that if that is true, then there is no divide between us and people that can do that, and just a tweet or a Facebook post could set me off on a murdering spree. Nonsense. It's absolutely ridiculous. There's nothing I could say or do that could set you on a murdering spree, because you have built-in, very deeply ingrained and very, very important inhibitions against this kind of thing. There, people that can do this are mad. And as I said in the video, when you hear stories of men at war, you almost always hear about they're crazy, they went on a shooting rampage, or they're seeing red or something. But this emotionless, absolutely robotic execution made me realize that sane people can't do this. You can make sane people do horrible things, but you can't turn them into what this guy was. In terms of the actual incident, and in my opening statement I said I need to know what these things look like in order to prepare myself. The thing I noticed right out was that the only I don't know if anybody got away from him. I saw a number of people that he shot at that were in motion. I don't know if he got all of them. I know that the guy who he didn't rush the shooter. If he'd rushed the shooter and knocked him down, then everything would have depended on whether or not somebody was close enough behind him. But the point is, this one guy who was just a blur on the video came close enough to bounce him and knock him off balance. And if it turns out that he'd gone diving for him, it might have turned out differently. Maybe it would have turned out the same. I don't know. But here's what I did see from that video, and that is I saw that cowering in the corner, and when I say cowering, I don't mean it in the sense of cowardly. I admitted in the video that's undoubtedly what I would do if I found myself in that situation. It's an instinct. It's get low, get under cover, dig into the earth if you can. But even playing dead was not an option with this guy. It wasn't like you could, there's countless stories of people who survived massacres by being wounded or shot and then pretending to be dead and maybe having bodies on them or whatever. But this guy wasn't going to let anybody out of there. And if that was your strategy, that would have been, I think, even more horrible than just about anything else I can imagine, because he just was extraordinarily methodical about it, just one by one, just putting rounds into people to make sure that they were dead. And I'm not joking about this business about having a need to know these things. I'm serious. Some of you do this, I know, and some to other degrees more than others, and some people don't do any of it. But anyway, I spend a large amount of time thinking and reading about things like this because I feel like it's a form of training, and it is a form of training. We train for engine failures in the flying that I learned how to do, which was in gliders, because engines don't fail very often, but ropes break quite a lot. And so I trained for engine failures for every single takeoff I ever made. I expected the engine to fail at the worst possible time. And therefore, when the engine did fail on 3 separate occasions, I already knew what to do because I'd rehearsed it a bunch. And having watched this, I realize you cannot count on him getting distracted. He wasn't in the slightest hurry. There was that was just it was just shocking how calm and relaxed almost he was in terms of his time. Nothing. I don't think he ever broke into a light jog. He just walked slowly. But the I've actually had nightmares about the playing dead strategy, and there is no playing dead strategy for people like this. Certainly, there's no playing dead strategy if you're on an airplane that's going to be flown into a building. I just want to be crystal clear about this. Crystal clear. I am not casting any moral aspersions on the people in that room. They had no idea what was coming, and we would have about as much idea if we were at not even a church service, just at it's like Wednesday night, movie night, or it's taco night at the American Legion post. But part of self-actualization, part of being a person who tries to get the most out of life and understands what these things are, and the fact that they do exist. I have been since I saw the video, and I saw it right after the news. I have been thinking about this again and again and again and again and again. I'm not an expert. I'm sure there are people who know more about this than I do. But just having seen what I saw, here's what I can tell you. If you tried to hide from this guy, you had no chance. No one got away from this guy by hiding. No one. I saw a few people in the side rooms on the way to the hall, and he fired some rounds at them, and I don't know whether or not he hit them or not. The guy who made a dash out the door was killed, but you could tell there was a moment when it was like he might make it. And likewise, the 2 people at the end of the shooting at the mosque running away, he put them down with 3 or 4 bullets as well. But it wasn't guaranteed that he would. So, having watched that video, I'm not making any value judgments about what people have done in these situations or not done in these situations. Nobody knows how they're going to behave in these situations until they get in these situations. And the entire reason that I wanted to see this video and I did this firewall is because now I can, like any other simulation, and I'm not saying that this was a simulation, but basically having watched this massacre, I can see what was done right and what was not done right and what could have been done better and how more people could have survived. And it would be nice if this were done in a laboratory with computer-generated characters and nobody had to die for it. But they're real people, and they're real people being killed. And I'm certainly willing to admit that there's obviously any number of situations that I would have no control over whatsoever. But there is a narrow band of situations where the actions that I take would make a difference. And in those cases, I want to be as ready as I can be. So So if I heard shots, I would, well, first of all, I'd make sure that, that my family and whatever friends I had, I could get out the window. I'd get them out the window first. But if it were me alone and I heard shots coming down the hall or out at the front, I'd be out a window. I mean, the second I knew it was shots, I'd do one of those Hollywood leaps through the window. And if I wouldn't waste, if I could open the window, I would. And if I couldn't, I'd just smash through the glass and just throw myself out the window and run like hell. And I'm told, as I mentioned, read a lot of history and military history, and a number of people have commented on the fact that while they were running away from the enemy under fire, they found themselves zigzagging instinctively. That they didn't think, I've got to zigzag. They just started to zigzag. At first I thought, how can that be possible? That certainly we haven't had bullets long enough for evolution to have an effect like that yet. But I imagine zigzagging also helps if you're being pursued by a leopard or any other thing, or having people throwing spears at you or rocks or whatever. If I heard the shots, I was by myself, I would try to get the hell out of that building, and I would zigzag and I'd run like hell. Just be completely serious about it if I was alone in the building. If I was armed in the building, I like to think that I'd be waiting for this guy to turn the corner and put 7 rounds of 45 ACP into the guy the second he walked in the door. I'd certainly rather have the pistol than not. But if I found myself in a place where I could not get out and I had no weapon, it's easy to say this after the fact. This is the entire point. You can think about things after the fact and try to train yourself to do something different. If I couldn't get out of there and I had no weapon, I'd rush the guy. I absolutely would rush him. And I wouldn't rush him out of heroism. I'd rush him because I think it is the only chance you have to survive. When I say rush him, I mean jump on the guy. And having thought about these things and read about these things, I'm assuming I have the presence of mind to do any of this. And again, I'm perfectly willing to admit that maybe I won't. But this is what I try to think about in these cases. I'd rush him, and if I had enough of my wits about me, I've also been training myself, preparing myself, that if I ever have to do that, I'm also going to yell at the top of my lungs. I'm going to make the loudest noise I can. And the reason I would do that is because no matter how unemotional you are, having somebody screaming and coming at you is a lot more disconcerting than not. And I just want to throw that guy as far off of balance as I could. I try to get him down on the ground, and if it turned out that other people were there, I would like to think they'd stomp his head in. But if they stayed in the corner, which I suspect would be the case, then it would just be a question of me versus him. And in a case like that, I'd be biting his nose off. I'd try and get his eyes out. I'd do whatever I could to make sure this guy wasn't able to pull that trigger again. I know that a lot of people on the left look at this and think it's like all big macho talk and I would have been this hero, I would have been that hero. It's the exact opposite. That has nothing to do with that. It's preparing yourself for things that are almost certainly never going to happen. But engine failures in an airplane are extremely rare too. But I was ready for those. And in fact, 3 of them is statistically virtually impossible. I really became convinced that the reason I had 3 engine failures in airplanes was because I had to talk about having 3 engine failures in airplanes for the rest of my life, because it's a very interesting point and a good way to teach from personal experience. So anyway, I'll try and close by saying this. Forget the heroics and forget taking the guy down. If everybody in that room, or even if 10 people, had rushed for the door just to get out, just pushed past him to get out the door, some of those people would have made it. And that's that. So this works both ways too, you know. Having watched this, I can't say, well, this is how this is how it works in this case. But when Muslims shoot up the place screaming Allahu Akbar, that's different. That's the ideology. To me, it seems like it's the same exact divide. There are people that can walk into a nightclub and just start shooting in Orlando or in Brussels or in Paris or wherever. And there are people that can't do that. They're not capable of it. And the thing that's most reassuring and interesting to me is that I know I've had the honor and the privilege to know a number of professional warriors, and among them, I've gotten to know a few people who were active SEAL team members. And when I say people can't do that, I mean these SEALs couldn't do it. If I went up to this friend of mine and said, it's in the vital national interest of the United States for you to just gun all these people down, I don't believe he would do it. I don't believe he would. I don't believe he could. And that's the distinction. And frankly, when you get right down to it, that's the difference between a soldier and a terrorist. So anyway, there you go. Okay, so we're going to do some questions, and we'll make this one relatively short tonight. But thank you for the kind words about the firewall. One a week, folks. That's the plan. If you were a member and decided to stop being a member because the content was too spotty or too just too irregular, inconsistent is the word I'm looking for, I don't blame you. And we're trying very hard to restore that trust and that confidence in it. So one a week, and if you were a member and that was the reason, we'd love to have you come back and see these firewalls and make sure they get out there. I don't know if anybody's able to recommend this to PewDiePie. I'm not looking for hits here. Much more important to me is that when this guy presumably said subscribe to PewDiePie, I remember thinking, my God, what if he'd said become a member at BillWhittle.com before he started gunning the place up? It's how do you live with that? I mean, it's one thing for people to accuse PewDiePie just because PewDiePie makes the occasional conservative comment, but this guy apparently did say that out loud. And if anybody can get this to him or knows how to get it to him, I'm not interested in the views. I'm interested. I would like very much for him to see it, only because, having been accused of something far less feral than this, something far, 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 far less than this, I know that it just burns a hole in you, and he's got to be in absolute torment over something he didn't do, had nothing to do with, and that's a big injustice as well. So anyway, that's that. So we'll do some questions, and then this kid and his gorgeous wife are going to go see a movie about landing on the moon. So let's have a look at some of the questions here. Oh, I was seeing that he mentioned Candace Owens as well. Okay. That's fine. I know what he's doing. He admitted what he's doing. He's already talked about what he's doing. He's trying to sow. He's trying to start a civil war. So let's go to the. I'm just heading for the Stratosphere Lounge question patch here. Here we go. I'm taking them in the order that I see them. Looks like they're more or less ranked by number of upticks. So starting with Susan Speakman, should we be taking Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her democratic socialist buddies seriously, or are they just a joke whose shelf life has almost expired? That's a good question. We need to take them seriously, but we need to understand what an incredible, unbelievable blessing they are to people that love this country. We'll just take her as one example. People who knew the history of Barack Obama, who knew that he went to the Little Red Schoolhouse on Mercer Island, who knew that his mother was a communist, his grandfather was a communist, who knew that his father was a communist from Kenya, who knew that that Uncle Frank, who may in fact have been his father, was a communist and arrested with the Hawaii 7 or whatever it was. Anybody knew anything about Barack Obama whose career started in Bill Ayers' living room knew what this guy was. But if you didn't know that, you would believe this guy with the nice smile who claims he just wants to come and help people. AOC is dangerous, and there are people who believe what she believes, but she's actually providing an enormous service and lowering the danger of socialism, significantly, I think, lowering the danger of socialism by saying what she believes. She's too stupid to know that you cannot be on the left and tell people what you really think, because if you do, they will just laugh you off the stage. All of the stuff that Obama was able to achieve and Alinsky and all the rest of it did through subterfuge and through just plain lying. I remember when people were pointing out, there was one picture of the candidates in 2008, and there was a national anthem or something, and 3 of them had their hands over their hearts, and he didn't. And he didn't have a flag pin on his lapel either. And I remember that criticism of him. So when he made his speech about Reverend Wright, how he didn't know anything about Reverend Wright being a hateful bigot, just absolute news to him. He made that speech. It looked like he made that speech in a flag factory. I mean, he had 30 American flags behind him when he made that speech. And, I saw right through it, but a lot of people didn't. It works. So AOC is doing us a great service because she's turning up the temperature of the water faster than normal, and that gives us a sense that we need to jump out of this pot. She's making statements and putting down stakes that are so far to the left that the party has to now, the Democratic Party has to at least pay some kind of homage to these ideas, or else they lose their young radicals. And if they lose the radicals, they lose the election. If they go for the middle, they lose the radicals. If they go for the radicals, they lose the middle. I don't know how they're going to reconcile this. Right now, I'm just happy that she's saying what they all believe, and it makes me very happy to see protesters outside of Nancy Pelosi's office trying to batter down the door and get at her because she's not liberal enough. It makes me happy. And my hope is that, not that it's going to make much difference. I am going to assume that Nancy Pelosi and Martina Navratilova and all of these people on the left who've been bitten by this latest generation of monsters, it must, on some level, strike Nancy Pelosi that the people who are trying to batter down her doors and smash the windows are not conservatives. They're left-wing monsters created by her policies, and this is what she makes. So that's that. Let's see, Daniel Reed. Is aggressive litigation the answer to the left-wing hate mobs who libel and slander people and get them fired? Yes. Does this fit with conservative principles? It does. Is crowdfunding the answer for people who don't have the money to retain a lawyer, and should this be formalized in some way? Thinking of some sort of conservative legal action fund. A conservative legal action fund would be the second best money that we could spend right after the second only to the Aurora project. Yes, we should be suing the daylights out of them. And the reason we should be suing the daylights out of them is because they keep taking more and more and more of a lead from first base. They're just going further and further and further away from first base on every pitch. And we look at them and stuff, and we don't do anything. And so they're getting further and further away. And so we need to start making some snap throws to that first baseman and keep them on the bag. We need to brush them back from the plate, and we need to do it now. We need to have a number, and I say a number, I don't mean like 3 or 4. We need a number of these left-wing fascists to be sued and have the university have to pay out a $50 million settlement. And when that happens, then this will stop. It won't stop because they suddenly became polite or anything. It won't stop because they suddenly developed a conscience. It'll stop because if we make it expensive enough for them to continue to do this illegal, un-American, and fully sanctioned activity, if we make it expensive enough for them to do it, then we'll stop them doing it. They'll simply stop. They will be stopped not by conservative students. They'll be stopped by their own deans and administrators who are just as left-wing as they are, saying you can't talk politics and geology anymore because if you do, we're going to lose another $100 million, and that means somebody's salary is going to get cut. Yes, the thing that's interesting point here is it's just consistent with our principles. It's consistent with my ongoing principle of fighting an enemy the way that they fight me and starting out honorably. That's part of the deal. That common sense and decency, you start out honorably. But if people are not playing by rules and they're trying to bite your ears off in a boxing match, it's time to fight fire with fire. As long as we don't initiate it, and as long as we are capable of returning to civility once this thing is over, then that's what we should do. But certainly lawfare against them is long overdue. And again, because we're decent people, we just think, I can't really sue a guy because he's got a different opinion of me. Well, you can sue a guy for being hired to teach geology and end up endorsing Bernie Sanders. That's what you can actually do. Okay, known miscreant Matthew Lloyd here says it seems like the SEC is going after Elon Musk hard. New York has offered financial incentives for building electric vehicle charging stations, but has specifically excluded Tesla from participating. Canada announced a new financial incentive for the purchase of electric vehicles that also excludes Tesla. Why does it seem like government doesn't like Tesla, even though Tesla is actively creating the utopian clean energy future that the progressives claim to want? I don't really know the answer to that, but I can guess. The reason that they are that they're against Elon Musk is because. And I understand the whole subsidies thing, and there's certainly an argument to be made. And people say, he's not a hero, he gets all these government benefits. Okay, that's true. But he is still spending most of his money on projects that I think are really important. People think, that because I think the EPA has morphed into something absolutely absurd, and because I certainly don't believe that the Earth is about to end because of carbon emissions. And I like fast cars and so on. But it turns out that an electric car is probably quicker than any internal combustion car. I've heard anecdotally that electric cars have to have limiters put in them because if you just put the accelerator down on an electric car, there's so much torque that it'll damn near break your neck. So I think, and I've driven in. I haven't driven them, but I've ridden front seat in the Teslas. They're fantastic cars. When you start asking questions like this, you have to start asking questions that are similar to this, such as, why did all of the feminists in the country keep supporting Bill Clinton? And when you ask questions like that, you kind of get some interesting answers. I wonder if the fact that Elon Musk is doing it and doing it with style and making money at it doesn't deprive them of this whipping boy that they've used. In other words, they're just kind of trapped. We want this clean energy because if we had clean energy, then everything would be swell. So along comes Elon Musk with a clean. Look, it's an electric car, right? So the electricity has to come from somewhere. For all we know, if he's driving the car on the East Coast, he's very likely driving a coal-powered car. I'll put that aside for a minute. He's actually doing it, and since he's doing it, it kind of takes away from the immediacy of their argument. I mean, if you think about it, if you really just think about it, let's just assume that we were through our intelligence and our innovation and engineering skills and so on. Let's just say, for the sake of the argument, that we were capable of generating absolutely clean energy and making completely clean, society, just zero emission society. Let's just say that we could do it. Then what? Then what? Do you really think that if we had that kind of Starfleet Academy kind of future, kind of Epcot Center future, do we really think that the left would disappear, that they would simply stop? And Steve Darrow points out that their resistance to nuclear is proof of that. And the energy has to come from somewhere, folks. And I noticed that the people who are calling the most for the renewable energy sources, I notice these people are not riding their bicycles to work. So I suspect that the reason that Musk is being singled out is because this is just a gut reaction, but my gut reaction is that they hate him because he didn't get the message that clean energy is not about clean energy. It's about destroying capitalism and destroying America. And Musk is providing clean energy and becoming a capitalist and promoting all of these American values. I think that probably pisses them off quite a bit. It's about the only thing I can think of. And as Original Peace Snowflake points out here in the comments, there's a lot of jealousy involved too. There's always jealousy of people that do things first. I am reminded of a story, I think maybe apocryphal, but nevertheless, it was attributed to Christopher Columbus, and he was. This is how I heard the story. He was at a dinner, and a number of people were basically saying, he'd come back from his voyages, and they were basically, or the first one anyway, and they were saying, because his title was Admiral of all the world's seas or something like that. And so a number of people were just kind of, big deal. What's a big deal? Anybody could have done that. You just got in a boat and sailed west. You're walking around here like you're God. I don't know what all the fuss is about. And at least according to the story, Columbus hands them an egg, a boiled egg, which is at the dinner table. And he says, why don't you make this egg stand on its end? Just make it stand upright on its end. And so the guy who's been belittling Columbus tries this and tries to balance it, tries everything, and just can't get it to do it. And he says it's impossible. So then they give this boiled egg back to Columbus, and he just taps it against the tabletop, so he crushes the bottom of it. And he crushes the bottom of it, makes the bottom flat, and now the egg will stay there. And then Columbus says, Now you can do it. It's easy to do it when somebody's shown you how. And I think that's really, a big part of it. Back to Susan Speakman again. Should President Trump run next year with Pence as his running mate again, or should he get some new blood like Nikki Haley? I think he should run with Pence. I think Pence is an excellent vice president. I don't see any reason why you'd want to, break up the team. And I think Nikki Haley is 2024 material, and I think she's top of the ticket material. That's what I would do. I think if I was pulling the strings, that's what I would do. I was very sorry to see her leave the administration. I think it would be great to get Nikki Haley a little more experience. I would love to see her Secretary of State. I think that'd be awesome. But nevertheless, as a governor, and I would certainly I'd certainly vote for her, and I think she could. I'm not saying that she needs more experience, but a little more public exposure would probably help. But in any event, I would save Nikki Haley for 2024. That's what I would do, and I don't see any reason to mix up something that seems to be working, pretty well in terms of results. Hey, look, it's Cindy Lucin. We haven't heard that name in a long time. I hope you're doing well, Cindy, if you're watching. Just heard on the radio, the Democrats plan to bolster support by registering 1 million new voters in Florida before the next presidential election. Felons' voting rights were reinstated last year. Should we be worried about Florida? Yes. Does the GOP have a similar plan? No. What are your thoughts, Bill? We were very close to electing a socialist governor in Florida last year. The opposition seems fierce. The best thing you can do, this is at least the experience that I would, seems to be obvious to me, is if you really want to get rid of this socialist impulse in America, the best way to do it is to bring about socialism just as fast as you can. The threat is always over the long term. If it turned out that I had a lever I could pull and have AOC's entire agenda or Bernie's agenda put into place instantly, all of it, make a pretty compelling argument that I would do that it'd be the right thing to do, because you would simply watch the world stop. You would just watch everything stop. I wonder how much support there would be for socialism if, for example, they grounded all aircraft, except for, of course, congressmen who are very important and have to travel. But what do you think would happen if they actually said, we're grounding all air transportation in the United States forever. We're going to cut the planes up. We don't actually cut them up, but they're grounded. And they're not going to fly again because of the planet. How do you think the American people would respond to that? And what do you think the word socialist would mean if it was actually put into practice? And that's a lot of, it goes not just to the air travel. You can make that argument for food or for anything else. The problem is it's got to happen relatively quickly. When I say relatively quickly, I mean in the space of 2, 3, 4 years, 10 years, something like that. If you don't do it relatively quickly, you start having people born and growing up never remembering what capitalism was like and have nothing to compare it to. This is what happened in the Soviet Union. You had people who were born into this system who didn't know any better, never experienced anything else. So yes, I'm concerned about it, and I don't know if it's going to be the next one or one down the future. But I am going to talk about this idea that Nancy Pelosi wants 16-year-olds to vote. She wants them to vote because they're emotional and they don't have any discretion. They have no judgment. That's why they're still called minors. And I think we should be running with this idea. I think this is the kind of mistake, this is the kind of landmine that their policies force them to bring about. And I think that I should be running with this on a flag. Just absolutely say, okay, so the Democrats are saying that we should allow people who are still children to vote. That's the definition of children. It's the legal definition of children as a minor. If you commit a crime before your 18th birthday, you get one set of punishments, and if you commit it after, you get another set of punishments. And it literally could be the difference between 1 minute. You commit a crime on 11:59 on the night of your birthday, you're a minor, and then a minute later you're now 18. Now you're not a minor. It's arbitrary rule, and some levels doesn't make sense, but you got to draw that line somewhere. So that's where it's drawn. So if I would just run on this, I'd say the Democrats want children to vote, and the reason they want children to vote is because the policies of the Democrats are childish policies. They're wishful thinking. They're magical thinking. They're the policies of children. And I would further ask Nancy Pelosi, why stop at 16? Why not allow 12-year-olds to vote? What's the difference? We already know where the limit between adult and minor is, and it's at 18, which is where the current voting limit is. So why not allow 10-year-olds to vote? And why is it that you want 10-year-olds or 16-year-olds to vote? What is it about them? What is it about young people? What is it about children? Because that's, again, the definition is 18. What is it about children voting that appeals to you as a member of your party? I wouldn't want children to vote because I think that the world always works in the same way, and that's why you get a little experience first. You know, this is why you get 20 hours of dual instruction or whatever before you ever solo, and then you solo and build up some solo hours before you go cross country and flying and all this. You know, you have to gain experience, and the fact that the point is not whether or not it's going to happen. The point, which we're too stupid to make apparently, is why would you want children to vote? Kulak 76 gets it. Yeah, I didn't get my finger quite on it there. He says it's because they're easy to manipulate. Absolutely right. So why not have 6-year-olds or 7-year-olds voting? Because you can convince them of anything. You can convince them of the Easter Bunny and all the rest of it. When I was 6 or 7, I would hide underneath the cushions on the couch, I'm maybe a little younger, as 5 years old, let's say, and I'm hiding underneath the cushions on the couch. And if you've ever put a 5-year-old under the couch cushions, you'll notice that they won't fit there. But my mom and dad, playing along, came in and said, where's Billy? Is Billy? Have you seen Billy? I haven't seen Billy anywhere. And I was utterly convinced I had them fooled, utterly convinced. When they would come into our room at night, when my brother Steve and I were talking past bedtime, and we'd hear those footsteps down the hall. And then the door would open, and we'd be like this. We were utterly convinced that we had them fooled because we're children. Children are wired to take in order to learn as much as you need to learn as a human child, children are wired to believe anything. They will believe anything. And as long as it's stated with authority, they'll believe anything. And of course, this would make the perfect Democratic voter. A person who is incapable of judging the distance between reality and fantasy. A person who's driven by emotions, untempered by any sense of rationality or self-control or self-discipline. That's the perfect Democratic voter. I think, why not go for 4? Why would you stop at 4? There's only one place you can stop between, and that's the line between children and adults, and that's 18. Let's see here. Got somebody, Martin Archer. So Martin Archer just in the comments said, please read my question. It's from several weeks ago, and the question appears to be, have you looked into the Flashman novels, as you said you would, in answer to my question from a couple shows back? I have not. Martin, I'm afraid I have not had a chance to read the Flashman novels, and so I'm not able to talk about them. And I got to tell you, while they sound interesting and worthwhile, it doesn't seem likely that I'm going to be able to read an entire series of novels about this stuff, no matter how good they are. I don't mean to be flip about it. I'm just saying I just don't have that kind of time. I'm running I'm trying to run 2 full-time jobs here and keep some kind of balance. So the firewall every week for BillWhittle.com to keep that ball rolling, and then at the same time trying to bootstrap this Aurora project. So I'm afraid I didn't get a chance to read them, and I got to tell you, I don't know that there will be any time soon that I will, even though I'm sure I said I did, and even though I want to, because they sound very good. But I just haven't had time, and I am and I never know where I'm going to go next. Spent 6 months in the South Pacific in World War II, and now I've spent the last 3 or 4 weeks on July 1st of 1916 in France. I've read 3 or 4 books on the first day of the Somme. I'd be happy to put them on a reading list, as you suggest. I just don't have a reading list. I just don't. I just follow my nose, and so I'll certainly keep an eye out for them. But I have to tell you, I don't think I've read fiction. I can't remember the last time I've read fiction. I really cannot remember the last time I've read fiction. Truthfully, I'm just racking my brains. It's nothing but pretty much history all the way through. But if I get a chance, I certainly would like to. Let's see. We'll do 1 or 2 more, and then we're gonna have to call it a night. We'll do this, and we'll do Eric's, and I think that'll then I think call it a night. So known miscreant Matt Lloyd is back again. Well, he's a top fan, so we ought to know. Captain Marvel claimed to be a success. What do you think about reports of Disney buying out tickets? Not sure if it's true, but many people have reported sitting at an empty, sold-out theater. That's interesting. The last right angle I did was about Captain Marvel, and I started off by saying I predicted it was going to completely tank, and it looks like I was wrong. And the reason I was convinced it would tank is not just because of the not just because of all the feminist messaging and all of that. I just thought it would tank because it just looked boring. I didn't see anything in that character that interested me at all. I didn't see anything in the plot that interested me. I couldn't tell you what the plot is. I know it's like Superman, with a better figure. Somebody falls out of the sky with superpowers, and then something happens. That's all I know about Captain Marvel, and it's pretty much all I care about with Captain Marvel. I did see on YouTube a really, really good analysis of why social justice warrior comics are so terrible. And this guy did a comparison between a modern comic. I'm not a comic book guy, called Ms. Marvel. And the big point of Ms. Marvel was that Ms. Marvel is a superhero who is a Muslim. And she's a Muslim girl, and she sneaks out at a party and accidentally gets drunk, and that's against her religion. And next thing you know, she passes out and wakes up, and in the sky above her are all of the superheroes, and all of the superheroes basically say, well, guess what? Looks like you're the luck of the draw. We're going to give you all of these magical powers because you just happen to be in the right place at the right time. Okay. And he compared this with this is the first edition, first episode, first book. And he compared it with Daredevil, which tells the entire story. On the first page, you know what's going on. You see him in the costume at the end of the first page. And you hear about how he became blinded and how he always wanted to make his father happy and how he succeeded in this and that and so on. Then he gets injured by trying to save a guy, in a traffic accident. Now he's a blind superhero. You got all of this pretty much by the end of the first page. You certainly had it by the end of the first book. He points out that the Ms. Marvel thing, all you get is she's a Muslim. And did you notice that she's a Muslim? Also, you may not notice it, but she's a Muslim. And the really astute readers of Ms. Marvel will discover that the hero is Muslim. And that's it. Daredevil works for his powers, earns them. He's constantly striving, exercising, working out. He earns his superpowers. And this social justice warrior, Mary Sue, just happened to pass out at the right place at the right time when all of the superheroes were somehow handing out powers, which I don't understand. One of the, it's when you say I don't understand it, it's like you can see the non sequitur in this. How can superheroes hand out powers to people? And of course, that kind of begs the question: well, how do superheroes have superpowers in the first place? But there's one simple rule, and that rule is if you're going to ask people to suspend their disbelief, if you're going to ask them to come for the ride, then you have to obey the rules that you have set up in your own universe. You have to obey your own rules. For Star Trek, that means, you don't get to just instantly go from place to place. It takes time, and any number of other things. It means you don't have an ultimate weapon that you can just use against everybody. So you're going to have a battle with the Romulans or the Klingons. So you're going to shoot phasers and photon torpedoes, and they're going to shoot disruptors and things like that. And that's your rules. Those are your rules of your universe. And you can't just come up with suddenly just come up with a violation of those rules. So I bring that up because there's nothing that I saw in the Captain Marvel trailer that I thought was interesting or even worth watching from a visual effects point of view. Certainly, she didn't seem to have any charisma. She was and not very unique looking either. It's like you went down to the mall and found somebody, took him out of Forever 21 and put him into one of these suits and said, "Congratulations, you're a superhero." I didn't see anything in it. I didn't see any of the Nick Stark stuff or the angst of Spider-Man or the guilt of the Hulk or nothing, just nothing. Just like she has all the powers in the world, and she's a woman, so she doesn't have to earn them because she's a woman, and presumably. And again, I'm not a fan of this stuff. I didn't see the Avengers, the last Avengers movie, and I'm not likely to see the final one. But I've heard she's going to basically defeat the arch-villain, was it Thanos or Thanatos or whatever? So she's basically going to parachute in at the end of the story with magical powers that she didn't work for and win everything because she's a girl. Any other questions? Now, in the comments section, Edward Smith said Shazam looks like it might be fun, and I have to say that Zach, the guy who plays Shazam, is one of the people I know best out here. Although I haven't seen him in years, but I've been over to his house many times, and he is a great guy. He really is. He's just a terrific guy. And when you first see the Shazam costume, you really look at it and you got to be kidding me. Seriously, you're going to try and make a movie about Shazam, and you see this big lightning bolt. And yet, when you watch Zach's expression, he makes it work. He makes it work. And he does that because he's got a very clean, very pure sort of innocence about him that makes it work. That whole thing, the whole thing turns on whether or not you believe that this guy finds this whole thing as ridiculous and as shocking as you do. So I think it's going to be terrific, and I think it's going to be as popular, maybe not quite as popular, but it's going to have the same appeal as Deadpool. It's going to be making fun of itself, but it's also going to work within its own set of rules. It will follow its own rules. It will, if it's going to be a lighthearted kind of thing, then you really can't have anything particularly tragic happen in the way that you could with Batman, let's say. you gotta if you're gonna wink and nod at the audience and say, look, I got this gigantic lightning bolt on my chest this wide, and it glows in the dark. You can't really start to get into serious stories. You got to kind of stay with the kind of campiness, or else you're in trouble. And you got a guy in a ridiculous suit. 4 movies from now, I predict he'll be wearing a completely black one-piece suit, slimmed down completely. Lightning bolt will be just raised, and he'll be, they'll take all of the silliness out of him, the kind of the way they did with Robin. But anyway, that's about that. So anyway, just the idea that whether they bought tickets, I was suspicious about the numbers, and I know Hollywood can really fake the numbers, but again, I'm kind of stuck with this fundamental belief that the simplest explanation is the most likely one. Most likely one is that I was wrong about it, and it got seen by more people than I thought. If it turns out that they completely faked the numbers for political reasons, then that's kind of another comic gate. It's another was it comic gate? What was it? Gamergate. Sorry, that's another Gamergate. If it turns out that's the case, so I hope they did fake it. It'd be fun to know, but I'm going to assume that they didn't. Last one, I think. Eric Blake. Okay, Bill, down to business. Star Trek question. Let's say you, as you are today, existed back in the 1980s. I did exist back in the 1980s, but I admit I was not quite so advanced. Next Generation and the other non-Kirk Trek shows do not exist. Gene Roddenberry gives you the keys to the kingdom. The new Star Trek is yours to create, develop, and run as you please. Character shift designs, general themes, and premise, all from your imagination. What would you give us? I'm glad you asked that. I would give you Star Trek Prelude to Axanar. That's what I would give you. Verbatim, with no adjustments. Needless to say, with all the talk about Star Citizen and all the rest of the stuff, this whole thing comes under the category of fan fiction. And one of the things, I saw Star Wars fan fiction today called Birth of a Monster, which was very, very well made. However, the director cast his son in the lead role, and the son is, I don't know, is 6 or 7 years old. And the kid is terrible. And the whole movie, which would have been at least interesting, the robot was fantastic, the droid was fantastic. But if he had a better, center to the movie, it would have been a better movie. It still got seen by 500,000 people, I want to say. So fan fiction is everything, and none of the stuff that we've talked about would work if we didn't have a great deal of confidence predicated on the fact that there have been tens of thousands, I would say, copyright violations that have been tolerated as long as you play by the rules of the copyright violation, which is you give credit to the people. In the case of Star Wars, it's like these are Disney characters. Disney owns the copyright to these characters, and you don't make any money off of it. So far so good. So you see all these fan fictions going back to was it the first Star Wars parody was kind of like there was a Stormtroopers parody real early, and it's like Cops. So you get the idea. Now, the only time I've ever heard the studios of any kind, of any of the studios, ever go to war over this was with Star Trek Prelude to Axanar. And the reason that they went to war over this was because somehow they raised about $1 million, I want to say, just to make the trailer. And the problem for Paramount and CBS is that hardware wars, thank you, Joseph, that's what I was thinking. The problem for them is that Prelude to Axanar is in every way, much better Star Trek than Discovery. Much, much, much better. Much better. Much better Star Trek, and much more interesting, not if only because you've got great acting and great writing. And the guy who produced it, who's playing Garth of Izar, I said, I saw this at first. I was like, that's Garth of Izar? He looks like a pharmacist. Well, he's a damn good actor. And whether he wrote it or not, I don't remember, but he's got some very good writers. And my friend Gary Graham is in that, and a number of other very good actors. And it's beautifully shot, and it's beautifully written, and it's just damned entertaining. And the reason that that CBS or whoever went to war and tried to shut them down was because they were rolling out yet another Star Trek series. And this one had nothing to do with Star Trek. Discovery's nothing. It's not Star Trek. It's got nothing to do with Star Trek. I'm just writing it off. And people say, "Oh, it's canon." No, it's not. It's not. There was not a period between, the uniforms you saw in the Menagerie, the Cage. The original Star Trek pilot. Those uniforms, and then the uniforms in the original series. You did not go between those two things into this blue. Tunics, accented with chrome. It just didn't happen, and there is no such thing as a spore drive, and it's not powered by individuals' ability to focus. It's forget it. It's not part of the canon. I don't care what they say. It just simply doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. So that's that. Axanar is just beautifully written and beautifully acted, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. If you get a chance, just go to YouTube and search Prelude to Axanar, Axanar, and you will see 20-minute tease for what should have been an entire series, and should have been what they should have done. These idiots is they should have hired this guy and hired Gary Graham back and all the rest of these actors and put those guys in charge of the reboot, because it is awesome Star Trek. It's more Star Trek than the original series almost. It is absolutely perfect. It belongs exactly where it is. And when you hear about the Federation basically being exploration, they run into the Klingons. The Klingons are kicking our asses so badly that the Klingons use a strategy that they translate as the strategy of little respect. So we're just getting our butts handed to us out there, and then they come up with the design for this new Federation ship called the Ares, and it's doing well. And the Klingons have the D6, and then they know the D7 is coming, but they're working on the Constitution-class cruiser, and you see the Enterprise-class, the Constitution, being built, and it's like everything is perfect, and it works great. And you've heard me say a lot about these Mary Sue characters and female characters, and I know a lot of people must think, well, you really don't think women can do anything. On the contrary, if you look at Axanar, there are 3 captains. There's Garth and 2 others. I don't remember their names. But the 3 of them together are terrific. And the woman captain of in that Prelude to Axanar, I bought 100%. I would be just delighted and honored to serve on her ship, because she's a genuine badass. She's a real captain. I saw one of those today, too. I was looking at some more stuff on the Columbia catastrophe, and there was a woman who was commanding the International Space Station. I'd never seen her before, but she was apparently head of the astronaut program or something like that. Somebody's going to provide her name in just a minute. Short, blonde-haired looking woman, and she didn't look like a woman rugby player, but she looked and sounded like the person who you'd get to be the captain of the, to be the commander of the International Space Station when you're up there. Anyway, it's that's real easy. I just would have gone back to the roots, and I think that's the answer for Star Wars. To somebody, here, Heather Dixon Walwork. I might as well throw this in because it's the same basic question. How can Episode 9 save the franchise of Star Wars? Well, Star Wars Episode 8 undid virtually all of Star Wars, so now you can't just plaster another movie onto the tail end of it and hoping that fixes it. You've got to go in and you've got to deconstruct. If it were up to me, Episode 9 would go in and deconstruct 7 and 8. I don't know how I'd do it just yet, but seriously, it's the kind of thing that needs like Luke wakes up in bed and he's like, it turns out the whole thing about Rey and everything else was just a dream, and Han Solo's there, and and they're having a party outside or something. You'd have to really, really, really go around, and this is where it gets interesting for me too. This is a bit like the Facebook issue and the Twitter issue, and that is, who owns this stuff? It's clear I'm a conservative and I have principles, and I don't bend those principles because it's inconvenient. It's crystal clear to me that Paramount owns or CBS owns Star Trek. They have copyrights on it, and that those need to be respected. And same thing is true for Star Wars. Is owned by Walt Disney Company now. It's their property. But if you ever, there's a great documentary called "The People versus George Lucas," and this entire issue is the entire theme of the movie, and that is who does it actually belong to? There's no question that it's owned by these people, but who does it actually belong to? And they make the case, and I think it's a pretty good case, that that it belongs to the fans who have put the billions and billions of dollars into it, and that's trivial compared to the endless, uncountable man hours or woman hours of devotion and brain power. All of these fan fictions, I would take virtually any fan fiction that I've read about Star Trek or Star Wars in place of what they've given us with Discovery in the last and Episode 8, because the fans love the franchise. They don't love the money, and they love the franchise. They love the idea. And just because you're a fan doesn't mean you can make a good movie, but certainly you can write a better movie. I've heard 100 people write better scenarios for Star Wars and Star Trek than what the studios deliver. And one of the things that's so painful about going to watch like a Star Wars movie or watch Discovery is just how weak they are compared to stuff I've seen fans do. I mean, they're just terribly, terribly weak compared to what just regular people are doing. Star Trek Continues or whatever, with we talked about him a week or two ago with Vic, forgotten his name. That was fantastic work. It was better than the original series. The supporting cast wasn't as good, but he was as good as William Shatner, and the lighting and the care they took to get it exactly right, that was magnificent work, magnificent. And if it were me, I would have asked Vic Mignogna, whatever his name is. I would have said, "Hey, Vic, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna buy your series. I'm gonna want you to not be James Kirk. I'm gonna want you to be another guy, but at the same time. And instead of the Enterprise, it'll be the Saratoga or it'll be the Constellation. I want you to bring it in. I want you to do it exactly the way you did it. But I don't want duplication of Kirk. And the reason I don't want the duplication of Kirk is because then we have to duplicate Spock and McCoy, and your Spock is passable and your McCoy is terrible. But yeah, bring me in Captain Flint from the USS Constellation 1707 or whatever it was, and let's go tell that story. And I think that would have been enormously successful. You've got a problem with the retro thing and people's expectation of effects and so on. But in any event, I sure wouldn't have done Discovery and Axanar. See, Axanar takes place in the period before the original series, which means that the effects, or at least the ship design and things like that, are kind of clunky looking. But it's just so interesting. It's so well written as a drama that you kind of want to stay with it. You can punch up the special effects. So when they remastered the original series with new effects on a couple of episodes, I thought it was great. I really did. I thought it was fantastic. So anyway, I think that'll do it for this edition of the Stratosphere Lounge. Natasha, my darling, my love, you can call the Uber now, and she's going to head over here. And we are going to head over the hill and go watch Apollo 11. And I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about with that next week. Thank you for the kind words about the firewall. Deeply appreciate it. And I'll upload that now, as well as this edition of the Stratosphere Lounge. Put them both up there right now before we get going. So thanks everybody for joining us. And if you are one of those people who were a member and you either fell off the wagon or leapt off the wagon on account of the wagon being on fire, we would sure love to have you back, because I'm serious about this. And the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Is that the actual quote? Something like that. Anyway, all right, guys, thanks very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. And as soon as I find my correct control panel, which turns out to be this of the many windows that I've got here, I will now bid you a very fond adieu.